Good afternoon. My name is Jim Turk, and I'm the director of the Center for Free Expression at Ryerson University. I would like to begin this afternoon's event with a land acknowledgement. I'm acknowledging the land in which I'm speaking to you today, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaties with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. On behalf of the Center for Free Expression at Ryerson University and the co-sponsors for today's panel, which are the Canadian School Libraries, the Edmonton Public Library, the Milton Public Library, the Ontario Library Association, the Thunder Bay Public Library, the Toronto Public Library, and the Vancouver Public Library, and we want to express our appreciation to all of these co-sponsors. I want to welcome you to the Center for Free Expression's virtual forum series panel titled Demise of School Libraries, Consequences and Options. School libraries historically have been very important. I don't know how many of you in the audience have your memories of when you first came in contact and were awakened by the wonderful, exciting world we live in. For me, my memory goes back to grade 3 and Miss Kirk, our school librarian, who, although I didn't realize at the time, changed my life and opened up a world to me that I could never have imagined, and that has been wonderful for the rest of my life. But the situation of school libraries is changing, and some suggest changing seriously. We have a wonderful panel today to talk about what's happening, what are the consequences, and what are some of the options that we might have. I'd like to introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Michael Apple. Michael is one of the foremost educational theorists in the world and a public intellectual who is deeply committed to empowerment and transformation of people through education. He is the John Bascom Professor Emeritus of Curriculum and Instruction and Educational Policy Studies at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. He also holds distinguished professor appointments at the University of Manchester in the UK and at the Beijing Normal University in China. A former elementary and secondary school teacher and past president of a teachers union, Michael has worked with educational systems, governments, universities, unions, and activist and dissident groups throughout the world to democratize educational research, policy, and practice. He has written extensively on the politics of educational reform, on the relationship between culture and power, and on education for social justice. Among his recent books are Can Education Change Society? The Struggle for Democracy in Education, Lessons from Social Realities, and the enlarged fourth edition of his classic text, Ideology and Curriculum. Welcome, Michael. And I want to point out we're having some technical problems with Michael's computer and sound system. So I think he's talking, I'm not sure if he's talking with us or his phone, whatever. We're grateful that you're here, Michael. Our second panelist is Brandy Bartok. Brandi is president of the Manitoba School Library Association. She has been a teacher librarian for more than 10 years and currently works as a teacher librarian in Winnipeg. She has played an important role as an educational leader in Manitoba, committed to building safe, inclusive, inquiry-based library learning commons spaces. And we're delighted she's with us today. Welcome, Brandi. Our next panelist.
Sorry.
I'm sorry?
Hi. Just saying hi.
Hi, sorry. Our next panelist is Diane Oberg. Diane is one of Canada's leading authorities on school libraries. She is a professor emerita in the Faculty of Education at the University of Alberta. Diane's research has focused on teacher librarianship education and on the implementation and evaluation of school library programs. She continues to contribute to the work of the organization, Canadian School Libraries, and the International Association of School Librarianship. Diane was the founding editor of the international journal School Libraries Worldwide. She is co-editor of a new book published by Libraries Unlimited on social justice and cultural competence in school libraries. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jim.
Not a problem.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Our third panelist is Cam Purwal. She is a teacher librarian with 20 years of experience working for the Vancouver School Board. The last 3 years, Cam has worked as a district teacher for curriculum and assessment, supporting all Vancouver School Board elementary teachers. Through her various roles, Cam advocates for libraries and the significant role teacher librarians play in fostering a welcoming, inclusive, and engaging environment for the whole school community. Welcome, Cam.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. And our moderator for this fine panel is Richard Beaudry. Richard is an information specialist and librarian. He has worked as a teacher librarian in K-12 schools and taught classes in the teacher librarianship diploma program at the University of British Columbia and in the master's programs in teacher librarianship at the University of Alberta. Richard is an American Library Association certified librarian and a fellow of the Library Association of Ireland. He is particularly known for his activities to promote human rights and freedom of expression, particularly as they relate to the censorship of materials in school libraries. Richard was the recipient of the 2016 Canadian Library Association Award for the Advancement of Intellectual Freedom in Canada, and he chairs the Canadian Federation of Library Associations Intellectual Freedom Committee, where he represents Canadian school libraries on the committee. Welcome, Richard.
Welcome. Thank you, Jane.
Now, the format for today's panel is the panel is going to have a conversation for 45 minutes or so, after which they will turn to you, the audience, for any questions that you may have. And so if all of you would look on your computer screen down at the bottom, you'll see a Q&A button to push. There's a chat one next to it, but the chat is disabled in this version of Zoom webinar. So use the Q&A button, and at any time during the conversation, if you have a question you'd like to ask the panel or any member of the panel, simply write the question out at the time you think of it. And then when we get to that point in the conversation, Richard will turn to Ange Holmes, the coordinator of the center, who will share questions that have been posted. So I think that's everything. Over to you, Richard and panel. Bye-bye.
Oh, welcome, everyone. It's been an interesting week just in the news about school libraries. Just recently announced that Stephen Krashen had completed the third phase of his study of children's levels of literacy. He found that school libraries and their collections were the main contributing factor. Library quality is a clear predictor of reading achievement. And in an article that just came out in Publishers Weekly, I quote Melissa Jacobs, who said basically school libraries are a nucleus of learning and school librarians build a foundation for all learners. And the OSLA this week, Ontario School Library Association, tweeted something about the new accountability measures introduced for library staff funding by the Ontario government. This happened on May 6th. These measures will recognize the importance of school libraries and staff to student success, literacy, and post-secondary preparedness. And yet, with all these news, we are here today to discuss the idea that teacher librarians and school library programs are in difficulty. So I'll start with my first question, and this would be to Diane Oberg. Could you describe for the audience today what is happening with school libraries and teacher librarians?
Thank you, Richard. When I first saw the title, Demise of School Libraries, I sort of said, well, no, there's school libraries all over this country. We've had a lot of losses for teacher librarians, funding losses. We've had loss of faculty across the country in researching and teaching in the area of school libraries, but school libraries will always be there. Then I was working as a school library researcher with an Ontario group looking at the impact of school libraries into post-secondary. And in the survey, a number of students reported that during their time in high school, their school library had been closed and turned into an open working space or a computer lab. So the demise of school libraries is a real possibility, even though 95% of the schools in this country do have a library facility. One of the things that's very hard to get is statistics on school libraries and teacher librarians in this country. The last time Stats Canada did a survey of school libraries was in 2003. And that would have been the first time since 1982 when Stats Canada stopped collecting that data. So today we have to rely on groups like the People for Education in Ontario and the BCTLA, which for 30 years has administered and published the results of a working and learning survey every year. So problems. It's a complex ecosystem, loss in staff, especially teacher librarians with a master's degree. That's really a shortage across the country. People for Education estimates that only about 25% of the schools in Canada have a staff member who is a teacher with at least a little training in librarianship. In Alberta, I would say that percentage is below 5% of the schools. Losses in funding. I'm hearing this from Ontario. And always there's been limitations to library services in rural Canada, in Northern Canada, and in Aboriginal communities. If I did a scattergram of school libraries across the country today, I would find a lot of dots around the greater Vancouver area. I'd find a lot of dots around the greater Toronto area and Southern Ontario. And then there'd be little pockets of dots across the country. And some places, New Brunswick, for example, there hasn't been a dot for decades. To get myself ready for this talk today, I went back to Dr. Ken Haycock's report in 2003. He talked, it was titled "The Crisis in School Libraries and the Case for Reform and Reinvestment." And other than the statistics, I was shocked to see that the sad news in that document still held true. So yes, school libraries, it's not the demise yet, but they're definitely endangered, and demise is possible today.
Well, thank you, Diane. Professor Apple, you can hear us? Yes? Okay. I do have a question for you. What is the broader context of K-12 education today in which Diane has described is happening? I don't think we hear you. Oh, yes, now we do.
Good. There's obviously going to be an echo. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do. Yes, we hear you.
Okay, good. I'm sorry, this is the first time that I've faced this problem in Zoom. I use this very, very often, as most people do, but this has now become a crisis. So we will work through it. I'm working off of 2 machines now to try and get one that works. I think it's actually very important to think about, to place this in its larger context. We're facing a growing resurgence of conservative movements throughout the world, not just in Canada and the United States, but in Turkey, throughout Latin America, in Israel and Palestine, and many, many nations. And this is in many ways an epistemological war, an ideological and economic war on the public sector. And this is the kind of thing that has a particular configuration of groups that are pushing us in particular kinds of directions. So let me say something very quickly about each group, because it's perfectly possible that we will win battles against one group and still lose librarians all over the place. And that, I think, would be a tragedy of immense proportions. The first group is what we have come to call neoliberals. And they believe one simple thing: private is good and public is bad. And if we can shrink public money on those people who are seen as not very essential, then we will make schools and librarians work in such a way so that either they compete against each other, or they will work more efficiently and fewer of them will do more work. And unfortunately, whether we like it or not, any occupation that's seen as historically women's paid work, the neoliberals delight in cutting jobs, salary, respect, autonomy, etc. They're the most powerful group behind this, and they're affecting schools all over the world. Second group is neoconservatives, and they have this fictional vision of a past. They believe very, very strongly that we can only make better schools if we restore a fiction called a common culture. And to them, they look at school librarians and say, you are doing things that do not respond only to our view of what it really means to be Canadian or American or Mexican or Brazilian. So there's an ideological element to this, and they want a strong state. They'd love to cut the budget, but they want to make certain that school librarians are not doing what they're doing so well now, which is to have this vast array of possible literacies, of possible understandings of the world. And to them, white men are the new oppressed, and anything that goes beyond them needs to be regulated. And if it's not regulated, it's lost. A third group is what we call authoritarian populists. When I was a visiting professor in Alberta, they were very, very visible. And this is a group of religious conservatives who seek to purge ungodly material. To them, God speaks to them, not to anybody else. And to them, what librarians and teachers and other educators are doing at all levels is very dangerous. So they will want to attack rigorously. In fact, the fastest growing school reform in both nations right now is homeschooling, an attempt to get away from public schools and to only teach that knowledge, which is very conservative. Then finally, new managerialists, a group of people who believe one thing: if it moves in schools and libraries, measure it. And if it hasn't moved today, measure it anyway, in case it moves tomorrow. And to them, again, they want to hold librarians' feet to the fire, and they want to hold teachers' feet to the fire. So this alliance is very tense. They don't always agree, but I don't think we can understand how to preserve school librarians unless we understand the attacks are coming from various groups who are sharing one agenda. And that agenda, as was just seen, just told very eloquently, is really dangerous right now. So I'll stop. That's to give a sense of an outline of what's going on behind these kinds of things.
Thank you, Michael. To Cam, you've been a teacher librarian for many years. Could you describe the work that a teacher librarian actually does?
Yeah, so it's so great for Diane and Michael to kind of set the pace and kind of show the big picture, what me as a teacher librarian in a school library am facing every single day. But I'm so busy in the trenches that all of that is happening behind the scenes. And I'm just trying to do the best job that I possibly can so that my students feel valued, so that there's equity built up, and I'm building allyship through all of the things that I'm bringing into the school. That includes the collection development, which is huge. And you alluded to that earlier with Stephen Krashen's article that you were talking about. And that there's so many things that we're doing every single day. As a teacher librarian, day in, day out, I'm not a full-time teacher librarian, but I'm doing full-time teacher librarian work. We're trying to do the good work every single day. We're trying to show value in what we're doing every single day so that our students are put first and foremost. We're bringing up social justice issues. We're talking about it through a critical and critical lens, so that we're bringing the curriculum in. We're collaborating with teachers, doing digital citizenship lessons, talking about where can we find credible sources, what can we do for this. So we're trying to bring engaging ways of teaching all of these really important issues, but we're trying to do it in an engaging way. We're trying to do it in a relevant way. We're bringing in technology. We're trying to be flexible every single day. So there's so many elements that we're probably going to touch on it as we continue our conversation, but that's just a few of the little things that I wanted to just bring up right now, Richard, so thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Cam. So Brandi, is what's happening to school library learning commons right now and teacher librarians the same in all schools, or are there some variations? And if so, what accounts for these variations?
I think what's happening in school libraries and to teacher librarians is definitely not standard. I can only speak from the Manitoba perspective. So in Manitoba, there's no provincial standard for school libraries in terms of allocation of resources or staffing for school libraries. This is currently left to individual school division discretion, and in some cases, it comes right down to the school level. So library learning commons programs have been eroded in some cases where there's a lack of strong divisional support. This has created a system that's really ripe with inequity. So in Manitoba, I see there are about 3 basic scenarios that have developed. So some divisions and schools have amazing and vibrant library learning commons in their schools. They're fully staffed. They include professional library techs and teacher librarians in these schools. And the teacher librarians have really been at the forefront of educational innovation. They've ensured diverse perspectives are represented. They've supported student wellness and learning in classrooms, and they've worked side by side with teachers on inquiry-based experiences. And they worked really hard to support school and divisional goals in many different ways. And during the pandemic response, have proven to be extremely flexible and knowledgeable about things like technology and remote and hybrid teaching. And these are really true hubs of learning with a pedagogical expert to ensure that that's happening. In the second scenario, some school libraries have a well-qualified professional library technician, and they do a fantastic job performing the functions of their job, and sometimes a little bit more even, but there's no teacher librarian or only a part-time teacher librarian with the pedagogical knowledge to align the school library with school and divisional goals and to work with students and teachers. So these school libraries function, but they're not the same type of hub of learning with a teacher librarian at the helm. So in cases where we have teacher librarians working part-time in schools, this really erodes what can be done, and it doesn't allow for the flexibility to work with teachers and students consistently, which is really what's needed to create that hub of learning. And in the third scenario, we see some divisions in schools where they have a bare bones library, sometimes with volunteers trying to just manage basic circulation. And despite the best efforts of the volunteers, these libraries quickly become disorganized, outdated. They do little to support the educational goals of the school and the division. We also in Manitoba have, unfortunately, a scenario where the provincial government has underfunded education for multiple years, and this has been absolutely devastating to school division budgets. And this has led to some really difficult decisions being made at that level. Where there's budget shortfalls that can't be made up, divisions have had to cut programs. And even in divisions where school libraries have been well supported, we've seen this year divisional draft budgets that called for the reduction and elimination of teacher librarian positions, and then other divisions draft budgets that called for more generalized reductions to library staffing. And now we're experiencing a full reorganization of the entire education system. The government's released a report called Better Education Starts Today, or BEST for short, along with Bill 64, which proposes some substantial changes to education, including the elimination of elected school boards. And this is going to be problematic for school libraries in this province for 2 main reasons. Firstly, where strong school library learning commons programs exist, it's because local communities and elected school board members are supportive of the work teacher librarians and other library staff do. It's through the direct connection that we have to our elected school boards that we're able to highlight how important school libraries are and strengthen support for them. Our pleas for equity across the province have gone unanswered by the provincial government, and I don't see that improving with the proposed changes that call for centralized power over the education system. And secondly, the best report that has been released doesn't mention school libraries or teacher librarians at all, despite mentioning the term literacy at least 10 times. So it strikes me that equitable access to high quality library learning commons across the province should be a key part of the restructuring. Yet this has been overlooked. I'm sure the implications of this have not been considered, or maybe they're not known, or they haven't looked for those implications. So I'm glad we're having conversations like we're having today, because I think they're really quite important. So that's sort of the current snapshot that exists here in Manitoba.
There, sorry, I turned my microphone off. Here we go. Thank you for that. That's interesting. We also have other provinces that have experienced different things, and I hope we will have an opportunity to talk about that. Ontario, among others. In BC, we won a Supreme Court ruling in 2016, and we had 359 schools without teacher librarians, and now, among other things, there's a lot of teacher librarians who are taking courses at UBC, and I presume the University of Alberta, though I don't have numbers for that. And we are just coming back into our system now. And I know that I've heard recently that Victoria School District is now cutting back on their teacher librarians, even though we've just come back and won our contract and our ratios. So it is a situation that is very difficult. So now that everybody's had an opportunity to answer one question, I'm going to throw out a question to everybody. How concerned are you personally about what's happening and its effect on children? So who would like to answer? Yes, Diane.
I think that's the critical piece here that we are concerned about, that I'm concerned about certainly, is the inequity. And there's a lot of research that shows that educational outcomes are related to socioeconomic status. And even if you look at Alberta, where there's hardly any teacher librarians left, we have a very, very low poverty rate. So there's lots of opportunity for parents to fill in the gaps. But really, it's that bottom half, the disadvantaged kids. If we look at a big school district like Edmonton Public, for example, about a third of their students are disadvantaged in some way. And without reinvesting in education, those children are really not going to live up to their potential. And that's important for our whole society, especially in a society, a Western society, that has a very, very low birth rate. So we need everybody in our society to be well educated. What we're doing now is not working. If you look at, for example, the PISA results, you'll find for Alberta, we still have very high performers, but we have more and more students who cannot meet the standards of the PISA assessment. And you can, there's lots of critique of that particular assessment, but the fact that more children are struggling with learning, I think, is a very, very strong signal that things need to change.
Good. Any other? Yes, Brandi.
I agree. I think the inequity in the system is a huge issue, and we see that a lot in Manitoba, particularly between rural and urban areas, and the sort of concentration of resources and personnel within the perimeter of the city even is something that I've noticed in this province, and I think that is a huge issue, and it's something that should be addressed at a provincial level. And I mean, MSLA has been advocating for that for years now. Something else that I think is interesting is I don't personally hold to the belief that the education system is here just to create future workers. I think that's actually quite a damaging way to look at the education system. But if you do buy into that sort of mode of thinking, if you think about something like the World Economic Forum, and they've released the top 10 skills of 2025 for employability in 2025, as I look at these, analytical thinking and innovation, active learning and learning strategies, complex problem solving, critical thinking and analysis, creativity, originality, technology use, technology design. I mean, I could read them all, but all 10 of these have to do directly with things that we support and carry out in school libraries every day. So even the people who are making decisions at the top thinking that we are, we want future employees, we want people who are going to be productive in their adult lives and employable, they're really cutting themselves off at the knees by not funding and staffing school libraries, because really we're on the forefront of all of this in the school system.
Yes, Tam.
Brandi, you put it so eloquently. That was perfect, because we aren't creating workers to work in 1950s anymore, right? We're creating workers, we're creating students who are going to be the future, our leaders, people that are going to be creating new types of jobs that we don't even know what they are. And right behind me, I was kind of smirking because I have a book that I was just talking with the kids about the other day. It's called Who Do I Want to Become? Not what job do I want to have, but what are the skills that I want to have? What am I good at? I want to be a critical thinker. I want to be creative. I want to be imaginative. So those are the types of things that us as teacher librarians are doing all the time. We're not making a big splash about it to everyone. Hey, everyone, look at me. I'm talking about critical thinking. I'm telling our students they're the future leaders. We're doing it in a way that is that makes sense. It's organic. It goes with what the students are doing already. So we're teaching them these critical thinking skills, but we're not making it like it's something that we have to bring in. It just meshes into everything that we're already teaching collaboratively with the classroom teacher, so that the language is continuing, not just in the library when they walk in through those library doors, but they're seeing it everywhere because we have the same language. We're collaborating with the classroom teachers, and the students can see themselves. They don't have to see, oh, that doesn't look like me. That doesn't sound like me. We're bringing their voices into the library through the collection, through the books that we're choosing to use to promote. So that, I love that you just brought that up. So thanks, Brandi. I appreciate that.
Okay, Michael. We don't hear you. Michael?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Very good. I'm sorry. Again, two computers working against each other. One of the points, many of the points that have just been brought up are crucial. We have to ask not only what the effect is on students, but on teachers. When you lose teacher librarians, what does that mean? So as a former president of a teachers union, I'm in contact with teachers throughout the world. And one of the things one of my favorite phrases that a teacher has just used to me, when I asked a secondary school teacher who had then switched to elementary school and a middle school, name is Gregory. I said, Gregory, how was your day? And he said, well, it was a day like all days. I didn't have time to go to the bathroom. It is the best description of teaching or being a school librarian I've ever heard in my life. And as the pressure mounts on classroom teachers, it makes the role of the teacher librarian absolutely essential. Since as the pressure mounts to be performative. So in the United States right now, as an example, in 40 odd states, teacher pay is dependent on test scores. And what that means is you will only focus on those children who can raise the test scores on average of a school or a classroom. Teachers hate this. They talk about it all the time. But that means that the place where students and teachers can go to counter this, to see the role of the arts and humanities, to see someone who takes the time actually to care, is the school library. So we want to ask, what's the effect of this, not just on the labor of the future students, what's the effect on teachers when we remove one of the key people in the school in terms of not just students' futures, but right now we are seeing a decline in people who want to be teachers throughout the world, in part because it is almost thankless. It's high pressured. To quote again, they don't have time to go to the toilet. So again, I just want to make that point because we're, again, this is crucial that we think about what's the effect of these kinds of cuts on kids, but also on the other people who work so hard with us.
Good point. Yes, Diane.
Michael, you make such a good point about that. A few years ago, I was at a teacher librarians conference, and the guest speaker was a superintendent, and he said, "Why do I support school libraries?" We thought, well, because they're a good thing. But he said, no, it's because it helps me retain teachers, especially new teachers, because the teacher librarians there are to support teachers. And I think that you think about the international, the school library policy. We're talking about the manifesto, the UNESCO manifesto for school libraries. It's teaching and learning for all. And that's an old document, 1999.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Brandy.
So it's interesting, the comments that Michael made, and Diane, thank you for adding on to those. I just keep thinking about this whole idea of accountability and how we're being put to task to measure outcomes and ensure student success. And I do, while I do believe that a well-staffed and well-supported library learning commons does absolutely contribute to academic success of students, I also do believe that it is a refuge. It is a place where students can come and explore things. It is a place where they can come and take part in a makerspace, for example, or in a different type of activity, be involved with different types of literacies that aren't always privileged inside of schools. And I don't think we need to measure those things. I think we need to think about, other indicators and test scores to judge whether our schools are being successful or not. And the idea that happiness is an indicator of success and joy in learning is an indicator of success, and just the joy of exploration. So I just wanted to mention that. Also, the idea that teacher librarians do absolutely support classroom teachers, and we absolutely support educational assistants and administration. As a teacher librarian myself, we are constantly engaged in professional development, and we are trying to stay on the cutting edge of things. This past year plus with the pandemic response inside of schools has been a time when teacher librarians have shown their flexibility. They've shown their ability to take on new tasks and to mentor and teach our fellow teachers in the methods of hybrid learning and remote learning. And I'm not quite sure in schools where teacher librarians were not available, I'm sure that journey would have been a little bit more difficult. I've engaged in quite a bit of support with my fellow teachers, and they're very grateful for that. And it's extremely rewarding for me to be able to offer that. So I think that is also another great point that Michael made, and thank you for that. And the other thing that I've sort of has been playing around in my head as we're speaking here is, the ability for teacher librarians to connect the dots between things. I have pedagogical knowledge, curriculum knowledge, all the way from K to 12, because I've worked in K to 12 and have been trained as an early years teacher. I'm now working in a high school. I worked in middle year school for many years. And just the ability for me to have that broad view and to be able to connect dots for kids across their school career and to make connections back and forth. And, you know, even within the high school to try to bridge connections between subject areas that can sometimes be very isolated. Things happen in isolation a little bit more in high school. So just in terms of that, and oftentimes I think people sort of imagine that by the time students are in middle years or high school, maybe they don't need a teacher librarian anymore, but I think that's false. I think we're just as important in middle years and high school as we are in early years, maybe for slightly different reasons, but I think it's definitely still necessary.
I would agree with you on that. One of the things that we do in our local school district is basically we prepare the students for moving on to university. We have transition literacy where we explain the experience of being a university student. We also teach students how to define the information they find online, how to assess it. There's a lot of information out there, as we all know now, that is not necessarily real. So we work very much in trying to get students to analyze, to take a look at the information, to seek the reality of the information that they find, not simply as we are told all a long time by family or friends to Google it. There's a lot more invested in time and energy in trying to teach students how to develop their research skills and even in writing papers. All these are things that we work on as teacher librarians, not just in my district, I'm referring to mine specifically, but I know that in Ontario, 2 years ago, the university librarians asked high school librarians to attend their conference because they wanted to work on a transition program available to all the high schools in Ontario. So these are all kinds of programs, and there's a recognition that even at universities and libraries, that the more prepared they are in understanding how libraries are used and how you can use libraries for reading, research, that they'll be available to the students once they get to university. So these are important aspects that we all teach that are very important. But again, we do that quietly with the teachers. I think what we need to do perhaps more is to advocate for ourselves with a stronger voice. And there is one now, actually, Save Our Schools, School Libraries, which is an organization that's out there. It's something that is now working more to advocate for school librarians across the country. The Canadian School Libraries obviously also does that. And obviously everybody on this panel. One of the reasons why I know Brandi is her defense of some of the teacher librarian cuts that have occurred in Manitoba, and her support through the MSLA of the teacher librarians in those districts. Okay, we are 45 minutes into it. At this point in time, I think we have some questions, I'm hopeful. Ange, could you assist with some of the questions that are out there?
Yeah, I do want to let the audience know that there's the Q&A button, so you can ask any questions you would like to at this point. The first question is, with the growth and application of AI, particularly Microsoft Teams reading module waiting to be released, how can teacher librarians reassert themselves as pivotal to multimodal literacy development for the future of all of our learners?
Who would like to start? Yes, Cam.
So one thing that I've been doing, and Brady kind of alluded to this earlier as well, you don't understand how many workshops and professional developments I've gone to this year, almost every single week after work. They're always after work. So you do a full day of work, and right after school, you go and sign up for a virtual workshop. So I've done so many on AI, on coding, on everything makerspace as well. So once I go to the workshop, I'm not completely confident in my abilities in Microsoft Teams or AI or whatever the technology might be. However, I have that fearlessness that I am confident enough to try and fail. And that's what I bring back to my teachers. We don't have to be experts on this, but we are going to try it. And when they see me saying all of this, not just to the other teachers, but also saying that same wording to the students and saying, guess what, we're going to reflect on what we just did. We're going to learn from our mistakes and not being afraid. And a lot of the times teachers get very busy within their school day, going over their day, whatever they have on their day plan. But the thing about teacher librarians is we have flexibility built into our schedules. And the brilliant thing about that is that we have time to now explore some of these awesome types of technologies, AI. So I brought in the Merge Cube when I went to a workshop, and we incorporated that into a simple machines collaborative unit that I did with a classroom teacher because she didn't have the time to go to the workshop, but because many teacher librarians are very passionate about what we do, we want to learn more because that's part of our job. And we go to these workshops, we learn how to do something. We're not experts, like I said, but we are bringing it back, and we're also not afraid to learn, not afraid to take chances and make mistakes. And that's something Brandy will say as well. I'm sure she's been to tons of these workshops throughout the years, actually. So yeah, so I just wanted to mention that. Hopefully that answered the question, but not sure.
Yes, Diane.
Just pop in to say, Cam, that really illustrated something that from some research that I did in a school district in central Alberta years ago, where principals and teacher librarians were real teams. And I asked both the principals and the teacher librarians, you know, what is it that you value about the other's role? And the principals said, number one, the informal professional development that teacher librarians provide, just working side by side. Maybe it wouldn't look like professional development to people who are looking in from the outside, because often working elbow to elbow is the way we learn best anyway. So thanks for a great example.
Thank you.
Brandy.
That was an interesting question. And I want to comment specifically on the AI, the artificial intelligence reading program that Microsoft Teams is releasing. I believe that students are able to read a passage and the program records them and it corrects their pronunciation. I don't know a lot about the program. I am a little bit afraid though, I'm a little concerned that we're gonna lose some of the social aspects of reading. Reading is a social transactional experience, and it was invented, for lack of a better word, reading and writing was invented in a social context and in a sharing context. And to remove the teaching of reading too much from a social context doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You know, reading is not necessarily a natural thing that humans do. It is an invention. I'm afraid of a couple of things when it comes to an AI assisted program like that. The first is the transactional nature of reading being lost, but the second is I'm a little afraid on the impact of diversity. I don't know how the AI interprets different accents, and we have a growing population of new Canadians who are doing their best to learn the English language as an additional language, and I'm not sure how respectful artificial intelligence can be of that accent, and how discouraging would it be to sit down and read a passage and have the AI tell you that you're pronouncing every word wrong because you have an accent. So I'm not sure if that's an actual concern with the program. I have not had a chance to try it myself, but I sort of start to envision the isolation of students as they learn to read. And I'm definitely not against students recording themselves reading and a teacher sitting down with that student and listening to it and the reader hearing some feedback, or even giving, having the chance to self-assess and to, self-assess and try to determine how they can do better themselves. But I don't know about this, let's put a kid in front of a computer and have the computer teach them to read. That makes me a little nervous. And the other part of the question was about multiliteracies and multimodality. I'm, having stated my concerns about the Microsoft Teams reading module, I'm definitely not anti-technology by any means, and I think it offers a fantastic way to integrate additional modalities into schools. And school libraries have done a very good job, I think, of recognizing that print is not the only way that we communicate, and it's not the only way we can convey a message. So I think, by staying on the forefront of that, I think that's how teacher librarians stay relevant.
Thank you, Brandy. I would also like to add that I was extremely impressed when we all went out to outside of our schools last spring. There were a tremendous group of teacher librarians across Canada who started working right away on finding online resources for teachers who didn't have a whole lot to start off with. There were all kinds of resources, and these were shared not only within Canada, the US, England, New Zealand, Australia. There was all these important resources for teachers to use in their classroom that came out within the few months after that. Publishing companies also changed the rules of access to their materials. And then we had to figure out the copyright. What could we use and all that? So this was all the kinds of work adapted to the online education that started. And a lot of it was done by teacher librarians, who that's what their focus was, to make sure that once we got on, that teachers had some resources to use. And I was very pleased with the work that was done by teacher librarians last spring, and is still working on now. There are some issues, such as Brandy talked about, in the sense of reading and all that, but at least in the sense of finding resources, the teacher librarians in Canada, all across Canada, did a wonderful job in trying to prepare online classes for their teachers. Okay, any other comments to this particular question? If not, I'll ask Anne. She has another question for us, for the panel.
Yeah, there's actually quite a few great questions that have come in. The next question is from Ben, and this is for you, Michael, so you can unmute yourself for this one. Given the ascendancy of the 4 different kinds of conservative groups, neoliberal, neoconservative, authoritarian populist, and new managerialists, can we solve the problems we have been discussing with school libraries and teacher libraries without addressing the larger issues? Where should we start?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, good. So that's a very difficult question, actually, but one of the most important questions we can ask. One thing we know, social movements change education or defend education. We cannot stand on the balcony, and we can't do it ourselves. So there are alliances that are being built in Brazil, in the United States, in many, many places in Canada, among Indigenous people and other persons of color and First Nations people, working with teachers, working with school staff, working with student activists, all together on issues of what counts as important knowledge, why are our cultures being disrespected. Those kinds of issues actually have turned teacher unions in particular, as an example, in Chicago into what is called social justice unions, which is that we will join in an alliance that is, in technical terms, counter-hegemonic, meaning just like the right has formed an alliance with these 4 groups, singly, we can't change this. But forming alliances with people over mutual concerns becomes crucial. So I'll give one just little example of it. In Chicago, neoliberals wanted to close schools. Period, 50 of them, often in the poorest neighborhoods. The teachers union realized that that would leave poor students of color having to walk across different gang territories to other schools. And that's very, very dangerous in some urban areas where the only identity that is available for kids for respect outside of the family is a gang. So teachers unions formed an alliance with the Black and Brown communities to fight against the closure of libraries and of schools. A group of, one of my favorite examples, a group of grandparents vowed that they would starve themselves to death. They went on a hunger strike in support of the teachers and librarians. That's a remarkable thing. And ultimately, less than half of the schools were closed because of their work. Now, if we take that as an example, it seems to me we can learn a good deal about if we are serious about defending this, it's not just school librarians and teachers and other educators whose lives are at stake. It's the community itself. And forming an alliance to push back in popular ways, not just academic ways, becomes crucial. So that's the sense I have about what is practical and what has served the purpose of building something that can last.
Thank you. Any other comments on this particular question? If not, Angie. Angie.
Yes, the next question is from Joanne. Joanne asks, despite there being many research studies that link quality school libraries and student.
Angie, we've lost you. Okay. Let's see.
So I could jump in and finish that question. Despite there being
Thank
many
you.
research studies that link quality school libraries and student achievement, right-wing governments and school boards do not seem to put any credence in these studies. How can we get governments to pay attention to the research? How can school library associations promote research in school libraries?
To answer, anyone?
I'll give it
Yes,
a try
Diane.
there, Richard. Research in school libraries in Canada is hindered by a lot of forces. One of them is no national center for educational statistics as there is in the United States. Another piece of the pie, the puzzle, is the loss of faculty members who teach and research in the area of school librarianship. When I entered this profession at the university level, there were still faculty members in almost every province in Canada. At one time, there were 8 faculty members in school library education and research in Ontario. Since 2000, there have been none. In Alberta, there were 4. Now there's 1. We do not have our own research. We have little bits, but not real programs, robust programs of research. So if research is not ongoing, it's very hard to make the case. But I always am reminded that if the doctor tells you a glass of wine a day is a good thing, and 30 minutes of exercise is a good thing, which piece of advice do you want to take? Well, I know I'd be on the glass of wine every day. People have to have a reason for it. Research doesn't convince. Back to Michael's point, it's movement, it's pressure, it's people getting out there, whether it's on the street or on the phone or in letters, making the case for what needs to change. That is important. Research by itself will not win the day.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Diane, and considering that you started off today by telling us that the last real comment about the state of teacher librarians in Canada was 2003. So there needs to be an update. That's no doubt.
I mean, there's other pieces to that as well. I mean, we're one of the very few, if not the only countries in the world that does not have a national office of education. And the coordinating bodies that might fill that role, like CMEC, the Canadian Ministers of Education of Canada, is totally voluntary and has no power, only that of goodwill and common sense, I suppose, which doesn't always exist in a lot of situations. Even the Canadian Federation of Library Associations has really stopped taking a role in terms of advocacy for school libraries. So we have lots and lots of barriers. Not that it's impossible, but we have to be realistic about what barriers do face us in trying to communicate the importance of school libraries.
I agree. Brandy, you had something?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to a little bit to what Michael was saying, and that we need to sort of court parents in the community and say, here are the things that are possible, or here are the things that are going on in your school library learning commons and why we're important, why teacher librarians are important, and serve as a liaison or a bridge to that research and say, here's the research that backs that up. Now, join with us and help advocate. I think working from the top down doesn't always work, and I've seen that in Manitoba, where we've tried to engage the provincial government in some conversations about equitable access to electronic resources, for example, for students in this province. There, you can write a letter, you can try to request a meeting, but that doesn't seem to get you very far. What gets you, the distance is to engage the community that's local to your school and hopefully have connections between schools. We've been working through school divisions and have had an ear that way. That might disappear on us here in Manitoba. So we're going to have to find another way. And I think Michael might be right. I think it's having to organize with the local community.
Thank you, Brandy. Cam.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that in Vancouver, we have something called Friends of the School Library, which is a group of parents who speak up at board meetings when it comes to budget time on behalf of what teacher librarians are doing in school libraries. The attendance for Fossil, we call it Fossil Friends of the School Library, the attendance and the number of parents that are part of it has not steadily declined over the years as well, because we have to find opportunities, like Diane said. How do we show our value? How do we advocate for ourselves so that people understand that this is something that is crucial, this is important, so that when governments go start making budgets, that money trickles down to the boards, that it's not something that we have to prove every single year in September. Oh, I wonder how much library time I'm gonna have in September. That's what I'm wondering every single year. I don't know what my library time is going to be. I'm trying to prove myself all year with the teachers that I'm working with, trying to advocate, telling them to advocate, saying, don't tell me you love what I'm doing. I already know you love it because we're having a great time. Spread it out to other people who can make these decisions. So that's why I think this panel discussion is so important. It's because this is one way that we're advocating and showing you what teacher librarians can accomplish, but we can't do it alone. We need people's voices. We need you to show us that you value what we're doing, so that somebody up top who's got money and creates the budgets is able to make those decisions. How can we get across to them the importance of what we're doing daily? And we're building equity. Just like Brandy mentioned about equitable access to all types of reading materials, including ebooks, audiobooks, and physical books. All three are equally important. All three are so crucial that there's a teacher librarian, so that we can show the students which types of books that we're going to purchase that will have equity in them, that there's inclusion, there's representation of all students. If there's no teacher librarian to purchase these books, anything will be purchased. It's not necessarily that it's going to be an equitable collection that you're going to be developing. That's why diversity audits in libraries has been going so popular the last year, and Rebecca Rubio is just one of the BCTLA members who did a workshop on that, and that's something that Vancouver teacher librarians are working on right now as well. We're trying to create in our fiction collections a diversity audit. So we're looking at what we have currently. Is it equitable? Do our students see themselves? Do we need to start purchasing books where the students will see themselves? So just saying, oh, let's get ebooks, let's just get some audiobooks. There's a lot of work that goes into thinking about which books we're going to be purchasing before the purchase is completed. Who's the author? Where did this book come from? We're Canadian, so we want to try to purchase more Canadian books. So there's so many, it's such a varied topic when we're talking about anything to do with school libraries. All of the expertise that a teacher librarian brings to something, it just elevates what we're doing. But you need to have an experienced, staffed teacher librarian in a school library for you to get the full benefits of what a school library can accomplish. And hopefully you guys are getting a bit of that today in this panel discussion.
Thank you. Yes, Michael.
One of the groups that we have not talked about as activists in this are students themselves. It's very hard for communities to act against students when they advocate for themselves. So an example would be the Algebra Project in the city of Baltimore, where the students were very, very angry that money from schools for libraries in schools, for healthcare, for what are called full service schools, was being taken away, and a new juvenile prison was being built in the community itself. And the students said, this is horrible. We know that we're being stopped on the street constantly. These are Black and brown and Hmong students. We can't put up with this. Our lives are being destroyed. We feel like we're being demonized. So with the help of their math teachers and the school librarians, material was given to show that the rate of juvenile crime had dropped by 47% over the years. There's no reason for the jail. And the resource person who was among the most important was not the math teacher, it was a school librarian. And the students then acted by making videos, going on media, going on tech, using new technology as resources. And ultimately the prison was not built. But one of the key figures again was the school librarian, who was the person who could access all of the stuff that the students couldn't access. So when we're talking about community work, it's also that the kids themselves become crucial parts of these communities. So just some thoughts on that.
Thank you, Michael. Ange, next question.
Actually, Ange's system crashed, and so it's Jim. So
Okay.
I'll share the next questions. So the next question was, what do you think when school boards say students use computers so they don't need to have books in their library space any longer?
Oh, I'd love that. Who would like to answer this one first? Cam.
I'll touch on that first, because this is probably one everyone wants to touch on, but I'll just give you a quick little example in our school. We have the library, and right next to the library, we used to have the tech lab, and now it's become more of like a innovative kind of a lab, which has different types of technology and makerspace stuff. So you put a computer in front of a child doesn't necessarily mean they know what to do with it, right? So when you bring a teacher librarian in, now you're teaching them those critical thinking skills. You're showing them what types of programs they can use, how they can use those programs. So it's the process, not just the end product. And that's an education piece. That's where the people that may not necessarily be within the school, they don't know what it looks like. So the other day when someone said, oh, maybe you can just do self-checkout. I had the grade 2s in the library, and I was like, okay, they're all lined up, ready to check out their books with technology all by themselves. I had to use my words to say, no, you have to scan that book. It took about 2 minutes per child just to scan 2 books. And if you're counting that with 25 students to try to access that technology all by themselves, it's not possible without a teacher there to show them how to do it and to support them, and also to show them guidance on what types of skills they need to have in order to do something. So that's just my quick little couple of examples on what that looks like. And I'm going to let the other panelists talk a little bit more broader as well.
Yes, Brandi.
I would like to deal with this assumption, first of all, that all we have is books in the school library. I don't know where that comes from, and it drives me a little bit crazy. Like, yes, we have books here. Books are important, and there is an influx of information available constantly online as well, but that does not diminish the importance of having books. In addition to books, we also have databases. We have video streaming. We have audio pieces available to students. We have artifactual pieces and things that students can touch and manipulate. And so the idea that all we have is books in the school library is something that I think we need to deal with head on as well. And the idea is not to prefer one type of information over the other. It's to be able to take information from a wide array of sources and to be able to synthesize that and put that together. And that's the real skill that we're teaching kids here. It's not about technology versus books or anything else versus another thing. It's about taking all of those different pieces and putting them together and coming up with something that's critically thought out and that's original. So I mean, I guess that's my answer to that is we don't just have books. That's not just what we're all about.
Diane.
Well, there's so many ways to come at this, but one of the ways I thought about is what do we want for outcomes? I mean, we know that a lot of people are very, very critical of the skills, the basic academic skills that students arrive in universities with. There was a study that came out of Ontario, 4 Ontario universities, and looking at what are the research skills, the writing skills, and so on of high school students. And did those skills change very much in 4 years? And the finding was no, they didn't change very much in 4 years. And then I went to the recommendations, and there was no mention whatsoever of libraries, even though these resources are in libraries. I mean, when we're talking about computers, we're talking about a technology that is found, it has to have behind it thinking and writing and creating. So you can't put all of your eggs in one basket, shall we say, with one kind of technology. There's all kinds of material that is not on the internet or accessible without pay on the internet. I mean, it's based on a very simplistic view that the computer somehow can replace all these other different kinds of ways of communicating, ways of thinking. And I think COVID and the Zoom life that we're living reminds us of that every day. Life is a lot more complicated. One book never did do the job. One computer won't do the job either.
And that's something else we
go
have.
ahead.
Collaboration, right? The collaboration, the coming together around those resources too, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
And one of the things that we've been working on in my particular district is the fact that a lot of teachers were unhappy about the fact that every time they told the students to search for something, the first thing they would do is either take out their smartphone or go to a computer in the library and do Google. And so what we've been trying to do with starting with students coming in grade 9 is we emphasize the fact, first of all, of asking a question rather than putting in a word. Try to get them to understand that a lot of the information they find is due to an algorithm. So we teach them algorithmic literacy, literally in grade 9 and 10, to try to get them to understand is that this is not necessarily what you want. This is what the machine is telling you to go to based on words and algorithms that the companies put into it. And they get that, they understand that. And then we also try to get them to understand that the information they find on the internet is not vetted. Databases are, books in the library are, all the information they can find outside of Google. And they have become kings and queens of skimming information on the internet, but not necessarily really looking through it. They're just looking for an answer. And what we're trying again is to backtrack that, starting in grade 9, going through grade 12, and trying to get them to understand that there are better solutions for finding the right answer. It's a lot of work because they are very much technology, into technology and thinking that they'll get all their answers off their phone or off a computer or a tablet. But there are, the emphasis that we have done, and this is a collaboration with the classroom teachers in the libraries, in our district to try to get the students to change that view of how they can find information. All right, and Jim, I guess you are now giving us some questions.
Yes, there's a question from Anita. Anita points out that the Royal Society of Canada, in its 2014 report that was titled Future Now, Canada's Libraries, Archives, and Public Memory, the report called on the Council of Ministers of Education of Canada to bring forward a clear and prescriptive set of directives to frame a national policy consensus on the most appropriate model for school libraries, learning commons to maximize their contribution to the K-12 experience and its learning outcomes, end quote. Anita says, we've had such a hard time communicating a clear vision, largely because of the disparity of funding and staffing models across the country and within jurisdictions, even within individual school districts. And she asks, how can we get political and educational policymakers to understand the importance of the vision being described by this panel?
Anyone? That was a long question.
Well, I was back
Yes,
to Michael's point about collaboration and coalitions and working across sectors. It certainly reminds me of the first time we developed a school library policy in Alberta. And really, it was the members of the rest of the library community that made such a difference. They worked with the school library people, the public librarians, the academic librarians, the special librarians. We have shared commitments and values and missions. So a broader coalition, I think, needs to be engaged that includes more of the members, for example, of the Canadian Teachers Federation. But we won't get there on our own. We have to find coalitions that will help us to move forward. And I appreciate the complexity and the difficulty of that.
Yeah. Any additional comments? Okay, Jim, can we have the next question?
Yes. Jean asked the question, what strategies would you advise for reversing the cuts made during the pandemic when teacher librarians were moved into classrooms? She says she lives in an area that happened to maintain their teaching librarian staffing, but there are lots of others that didn't. And how do we deal with that problem? How do we restore teacher librarians to what we had before the pandemic?
Boy.
That's
Anyone? That's a tough one. Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah. I'd probably say start with your Teachers Association. I mean, BC's experience fighting all the way to the Supreme Court over 12 years. BCTLA and other specialist teacher groups would not have gotten there without their teachers union. So that would be a place that I would start. Looking in Alberta, that's the place where we would need to start to build that coalition.
Yes, Michael.
I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I want us to be realistic. COVID may have transformed radically public schools in general. So that one of the things that current studies show is the immense gains that homeschooling has made. Large numbers of poor kids are no longer in school because their parents have lost their jobs and the kids have to work. Now that actually tells us something about with whom we might form alliances, which is these kids and their parents, not just about libraries, but about schooling itself. Large numbers of kids who are immigrants in large cities, especially young women, have been totally unmoored by this. And there's been sexual predatory behavior against them because they're in the home with childcare a good deal. And all these things are going on simultaneously. But each of them offers an opportunity that is normally, I would then look at how would I meet with and learn from these young women about what they have had to sacrifice and how can they be brought in to support me, but also what can I do to support them. So I want us to think strategically about what's going on and then say, what are the possible alliances? But again, I think Diane's point about alliances becomes crucial here, and starting with teacher unions. Obviously, as a former teacher union president, that sort of makes me excited. But there is this sense about sometimes we have to think across the categories. It's not just the librarians and the teachers are being affected, but patriarchal stuff is going on in really vicious ways because of COVID. So can we form alliances with young women who have sacrificed an immense amount right now and are just searching for a future that feels like they can never have it? So I'll stop, but again, that's what we call thinking relationally, politically. What are the relations that are there and being transformed to begin to engage with these kinds of things?
Thank you, Michael. Jim,
Yes,
next question, please.
there's a question from Holly. Holly notes that as our country embraces reconciliation, or pretends to, it would seem like teacher librarians are paramount to supporting Indigenous ways of knowing. Computers can't do that. Do you have any concrete examples of how teacher librarians are supporting reconciliation in your schools?
I can speak.
Brandy.
Yeah. Particularly in the school division that I work in, and I'm going to guess in other school divisions where teacher librarians still exist, most of us have received treaty training. So we've, had the experience to become educated about what it means to be treaty people and to move forward with that. I also spend, and I know many of my colleagues spend, a tremendous amount of effort to ensure that we have Indigenous perspectives well represented in our school library materials, and that those are highlighted and made known to students. We've also done things like beading, for example, in the library. Any way that we can find to connect to those Indigenous perspectives and highlight them, we've made extreme effort to do that. So it's something that we have at the forefront of our minds always, and we are trying to address reconciliation and to move forward by having truthful materials in our libraries that represent truthful past histories, and also having hopeful materials and materials that are written and created by Indigenous authors and creators in our school libraries as well. I think that's just one small part of it. I know that there are other things that are going on, and I'm sure other people would be able to speak to that as well.
Cam, I think you put your hand up. Yes.
Yeah. So just like you said, Brandy, even in our district in Vancouver, we've got, we're building our collection development, making sure we have authentic Indigenous materials and resources for our teachers to use and for our students to use, and we're promoting them. We're making sure that they're visible and we are using them throughout the curriculum, because now it's in the BC curriculum, it's right in there, every single subject area. There is Indigenous knowledge that needs to be taught within each one. So one of the difficulties that teacher librarians have is we need more materials to purchase that have things written from the Indigenous perspective. So that's something we've been pushing for as teacher librarians. We've been trying to purchase books that will fit into the First Peoples perspective and not from the European perspective, and weeding our collections as well. So that's the other thing about collection development. If there's no teacher librarian there who's experienced, then that's not going to happen. There's going to be books in your school library that will be from 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. If you have a teacher librarian who's well staffed and who's in the library and has the dedicated, flexible time to go through the collection and read it for things that are not relevant at this time, that things that are discriminatory, unless you can use it as a teachable moment. So when you're pulling those materials out that are from European perspective, then the teacher librarian is looking at that resource, and they're thinking, how can we now use this as a teachable moment so that the students can see from a historical perspective, this is what they used to think, but now here's a new book that we just purchased that's from the Indigenous perspective. This is what we want to show our students as well. The other thing that I was going to bring up is if the teacher librarian is fortunate enough to have flexibly scheduled time, they're going to be able to reach out to the Indigenous, the elders, so that they can come and speak to the different classes that they're working with, not just a one-off, but building something through that. We have artists in residence. So they did a weaving project with the grade 6, 7s. There's a lot of opportunities out there, but for a classroom teacher to go out and search for them, that's not necessarily something they're used to doing, but a teacher librarian, that's part of we reach out to community stakeholders all the time. We've got partnerships within Science World in Vancouver anyways. So we reach out across the aisle all the time. We're bringing in fresh blood all the time when we're doing collaborative units. And that's how we enrich the students' experience of learning different topics as well. These are just, I'm just touching on a few things. There's so many more things that in our district, we're fortunate enough, all classroom teachers and teachers and all staff, we have had professional development days where our Indigenous workers they're actually talking to us, our consultants. They're doing a professional development day. I've been fortunate enough the last few years to do teacher librarian update sessions in September, where I'll bring the Indigenous consultant to speak to us about the Indigenous perspective and types of books that we should be looking for, types of books that we should be reading. So that's where teacher librarians want to excel in all of these elements. We want to bring this to our students and our teachers, but we need that time to be in the library in order to accomplish that. So if we don't have a teacher librarian in a school library that has any flexible scheduled time, they don't have the time to do it. And it's not their fault. And that's the part that is difficult when you have a school library, but not well staffed. That's a difference.
All right. Well, thank you, Cam. That was a very good answer. Interestingly enough, we have gone now for an hour and a half. So I think we are at the end. Jim, would we have time for one more question, or should we close ranks?
I think we only have a minute or two left, so probably not enough time to go to another question.
Okay. So I'll leave to Jim to close the proceedings.
Well, I would like to really thank the panel and the audience. It's been quite a stimulating discussion, and there's so much more that we could cover. 90 minutes seems like a long time at the beginning of an event, but now that it's over, I feel that there's so much more that certainly in the questions that were asked that we haven't had a chance to get to. And I also want to thank both the panel and the audience for their patience during the technical difficulties. This is the 100th panel discussion that the Center for Free Expression has organized over the last 5 years. And we've had more technical problems with this one than the other 99 combined. So thank you. I don't know what befell us today, but there we are. A video recording, a video podcast of this panel discussion will be posted on the Center for Free Expression website tomorrow. So that if any of you want to encourage colleagues or friends to view it, it'll be available. The website address is cfe.ryerson.ca. For more information, you can always go to that website. Next week, a week from today on May 19th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll begin a new Center for Free Expression series that's titled Taming Big Tech, Exploring the Alternatives. as we look at how to regulate social media and how to deal with the power of the tech giants. Our first event in that series will feature the award-winning author, journalist, and blogger Cory Doctorow in a conversation with Andrew Clement. In addition to his many award-winning and best-selling books, Cory is a special consultant to the Electronic Freedom Frontier Foundation, a visiting professor at the Open University in the UK, which awarded him an honorary doctorate in computer science. He's an MIT Media Lab research affiliate and a visiting professor of practice at the University of North Carolina School of Library and Information Sciences. And in 2007, he was awarded the Fulbright Chair at the Annenberg Center for Public Diplomacy at the University of Southern California. Cory's title for the event is How to Destroy Surveillance Capitalism, Seize the Means of Computation. So if you'd like to join that discussion, it'll be next Wednesday, May 19th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information about this event and any other upcoming events, as well as access to all the podcasts of our past events, again, go to our website, cfe.ryerson.ca, and click on events. I want to thank you again very much, both the panel, which I thought did a marvelous job, and the audience for being with us today. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.